Amidst poverty, a seamstress and her daughter decide to feed a homeless man. The simple gesture awakens dormant memories and begins a bond that will change their lives forever. But when the man's past resurfaces unexpectedly, everyone is confronted with choices that transform their destinies. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you are watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you will hear in your life. The traffic on the FDR Drive was surprisingly light for a Thursday afternoon. Richard Miller watched from the window of the executive town car as the dark waters of the East River reflected the orange sky of the late afternoon in New York City. His driver, Mr. Peterson, navigated the vehicle with the precision of someone who knew every speed bump, every stoplight, every shortcut in the immense city. Richard loosened his Italian tie and sighed deeply. Another day, another endless meeting, another deal closed. The company's numbers had never been better. The stock was climbing consistently, and the investors were all smiles, but none of it really mattered. Mr. Peterson glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed his boss's distant expression. He'd known the man for 15 years, since before everything changed, since before the mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, became a silent mausoleum, since before little Sophia stopped talking. Richard pulled his phone from the inner pocket of his suit jacket and checked the screen. 17 unread messages, all work-related. None of them mattered. He put the phone away and went back to staring out the window. The city lights were beginning to switch on, one by one, like terrestrial stars announcing the arrival of night. 2 years. It had been 2 years since Lucy was gone, 2 years since the house lost its heart, 2 years since Sophia's laughter echoed through the hallways. The girl had only been 3 when it happened. Now at 5, it was as if she carried the weight of a lifetime of pain on her small back. The doctors said it was selective mutism, a traumatic response to the loss. Psychologists, therapists, specialists of all kinds had paraded through the mansion, all with their theories, all with their methods, all promising results. Nothing worked. Sophia had simply closed herself off in her own world, a place where words no longer existed. Richard remembered every detail of those terrible days. Lucy had always been strong, always the light of the house. When she got sick, she hid the symptoms for months, not wanting to worry anyone. When she finally agreed to go to the hospital, it was already too late. The doctors did everything they could, but some battles simply can't be won. She passed away on an autumn morning, with the leaves falling outside and the sky a leaden grey. Sophia was at school. Richard still wondered if he'd done the right thing by not letting her say goodbye. Maybe if he had, the girl wouldn't carry so much inside her. The car began to climb the tree-lined street that led to the mansion. The canopies formed a green tunnel over the asphalt. It was one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Greenwich, where each house was a small palace, and privacy was guaranteed by high walls and conspicuous security. The Miller house was particularly imposing, with its 3 stories, extensive gardens, and a neoclassical facade that Lucy had chosen herself. Mr. Peterson parked in the garage at 6:45. Richard glanced at his watch and frowned. He was supposed to arrive at 7:15. The return flight from Washington, D.C. had left early, taking advantage of a better air traffic window. He had tried to call ahead, but the call didn't go through. Whatever, he thought. It made no difference if he arrived now or in half an hour. The routine would be the same. Enter through the back door, go up to his room, change clothes, eat dinner alone in his office, while Sophia ate in her room under the watchful eyes of Mrs. Evans. Mrs. Evans, the family's head housekeeper for over a decade, a woman in her 60s with a rigid posture, hair pulled back in a tight bun, and a permanently serious expression. She had been a rock during the difficult days, organizing everything, keeping the house running, and looking after Sophia with military efficiency. Richard knew he should be grateful, but there was something about Mrs. Evans that had always bothered him. Maybe it was her coldness, the way she treated all the other staff with disdain, the way she seemed to judge every decision he made regarding his daughter. Richard grabbed his briefcase, thanked Mr. Peterson, and entered through the side door that led directly into the foyer. The house was silent, as always. The light marble floor reflected the glow from the crystal chandeliers. Expensive paintings decorated the walls. Everything was impeccable, everything in its place, everything lifeless. He left his briefcase on the French console table and began to loosen his tie. That's when he heard it. A laugh. Crystal clear, pure, absolutely unmistakable. Richard froze. His heart pounded. For a second he thought he was hallucinating, that the exhaustion and stress had finally taken their toll. But no. The sound came again, louder this time, a child's giggle full of joy, echoing from somewhere inside the house. Sophia. His legs moved before his brain could fully process what was happening. He crossed the foyer, passed through the living room and rounded the hallway that led to the private wing of the house. The sound was coming from the kitchen. Richard quickened his pace, his heart beating so hard he could hear it in his own ears. When he reached the kitchen doorway, the scene before him made him stop dead in his tracks. Sophia was sitting on the shoulders of a young woman he had never seen before. The girl was holding on to the woman's brown hair with her two small hands, laughing uncontrollably as the woman spun around gently, making exaggerated movements as if she were an airplane. The golden late afternoon light streamed through the large windows, bathing the entire scene in an almost surreal glow. The woman was young, probably in her early 20s. She wore a simple maid's uniform, but there was something about her face that caught his attention. It was her smile, a genuine open smile, the kind that lights up an entire face. She was humming a song as she moved, completely oblivious to his presence. And Sophia, his little Sophia, the girl who hadn't uttered a word in 2 years, the child who spent her days in a silent melancholy, who barely reacted to stimuli, who lived in an impenetrable bubble of sadness. There she was, laughing as if she had never stopped, as if the last 2 years were just a distant nightmare. "Higher, airplane, higher!" Sophia shouted, her high-pitched voice cutting through the air like a long-forgotten song. Richard felt his legs go weak. He leaned against the doorframe. A wave of conflicting emotions hit him like a tsunami. Relief, joy, confusion, and something else. Something dark and visceral that he couldn't immediately name. The young woman finally noticed his presence. She spun slowly to a stop, the smile still on her face but beginning to fade when she saw his expression. Her eyes, large and brown, widened slightly. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of nervousness. "We weren't expecting you so soon." Richard didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Sophia. The girl had seen him now, too. Her face changed. The joy gave way to something that looked like fear. She clung tighter to the woman's hair. It was then that the dark feeling inside Richard took shape and name. Jealousy. Not ordinary jealousy, but something deeper. Envy. Resentment. This woman, a complete stranger, had achieved in days, maybe weeks, what he hadn't managed in 2 years. She had brought his daughter back to life. And Sophia, his own daughter, seemed more comfortable in this stranger's arms than she had ever seemed in his. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "Marina, sir, Marina Clark. I was hired 3 weeks ago to help in the kitchen and with the cleaning." 3 weeks. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. 3 weeks, and she had already managed to break through the barrier that he, her own father, couldn't crack in 2 years. "And why is my daughter on your shoulders?" he continued, each word loaded with a tension he could barely control. Marina hesitated. "She was helping me make cookies, sir. She wanted to reach the jars on the high shelf. I just what?" he interrupted, taking a step into the kitchen. "Decided it would be appropriate to use my daughter like a toy?" "No, sir, I would never," Marina began, her face paling. "Daddy, no!" Sophia's voice cut through the air like a lightning bolt. Richard froze again. Daddy. She had called him Daddy. After so much silence, the first word directed at him in years was a plea defending someone else. Something inside him broke. An irrational anger, fueled by months of frustration, of helplessness, of sleepless nights wondering what he had done wrong, erupted like a volcano. "Get my daughter off your shoulders. Now," he ordered, his voice echoing off the tiled kitchen walls. Marina obeyed immediately, bending down carefully to set Sophia on the floor. But the girl wouldn't let go. She clung to the woman's neck, her little legs wrapped around her waist, her face buried in her shoulder. "No, Daddy, don't send her away," Sophia whimpered, her voice muffled but clearly audible. Every word was a knife in Richard's heart. His daughter was talking. She was really talking. But she wasn't talking to him. She was talking because of someone else, to protect someone else. "Sophia, come here," he said, holding out, his arms trying to control the tremor in his own voice. "No," the girl said, tightening her hug around Marina. It was at that moment that Mrs. Evans entered the kitchen. Her presence was like a blast of cold air. She assessed the situation in an instant, her small, sharp eyes missing no detail. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice cutting, "I'm glad you've arrived. I was going to speak with you about this situation as soon as possible." "What situation?" Richard turned to her, grateful for the interruption but also annoyed. Mrs. Evans walked to stand beside him, her hands clasped in front of her in a posture that conveyed both authority and disapproval. "This young woman," she gestured dismissively toward Marina, "has been behaving in a completely inappropriate manner with young Sophia. I have warned her repeatedly to maintain her distance, that she should not attempt to create these bonds, but she insists on disobeying." "I was just playing with her," Marina protested, her voice trembling slightly. "She seemed so sad. I just wanted to—" "You weren't hired to play," Mrs. Evans cut her off coldly. "You were hired to clean and cook, nothing more." "But she's laughing," Marina pointed out the obvious, her eyes shining with a mix of frustration and determination. "She's happy. Isn't that what matters?" "What matters," Mrs. Evans took a step forward, "is that you are overstepping your bounds. Young Sophia is under my care. She always has been. And I don't need some little maid trying to be the hero of the situation." Richard watched the exchange between the two women, his mind trying to process everything that was happening. Was Mrs. Evans right? Was Marina trying to manipulate the situation? Or was it the other way around? Was there something else going on here that he wasn't seeing? "Sophia," he said again, this time more firmly, "come with Daddy." The girl finally lifted her face from Marina's shoulder. Her eyes were filled with tears. She looked at her father, and in that gaze, Richard saw something that shook him to his core. Fear. His daughter was afraid of him. "Please don't send Marina away," Sophia whispered. "No one is going anywhere," Richard answered automatically, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Mrs. Evans cleared her throat loudly. "With all due respect, sir, I think you should reconsider this young woman's employment in this house. She clearly does not understand appropriate boundaries." Marina opened her mouth to protest, but Richard held up a hand, silencing everyone. His head ached. The day had been long, the trip tiring, and now this. All he wanted was silence. Peace. But peace had long since abandoned this house. "Everyone, to your places," he ordered. "Marina, get back to work. Mrs. Evans, we need to talk. Sophia." He crouched down to his daughter's level. "You're going to have dinner and then go to bed. We'll talk tomorrow." "But Daddy," Sophia started. "No buts," he cut her off, more sharply than he intended. The girl flinched as if she'd been slapped. Her tears began to fall silently. Marina instinctively took a step forward, as if to comfort the child, but Mrs. Evans grabbed her arm forcefully. "You've done enough," the housekeeper hissed. Marina pulled her arm away sharply, but didn't approach Sophia again. Instead, she looked at Richard with an expression that mixed disappointment with something that looked like pity. Pity for him. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, and left the kitchen with quick steps. Sophia sobbed loudly and ran after her. Mrs. Evans intercepted her, easily scooping the girl into her arms despite her protests. The child kicked, screamed, and called for Marina repeatedly, but the housekeeper held her firmly and carried her out of the kitchen, heading toward her room. Richard was left alone in the kitchen. The silence that always inhabited the house returned, wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. But it was different now. Now he knew the silence wasn't inevitable. His daughter could talk, she could laugh, She could be happy, just not with him. He walked over to the counter where remnants of cookie dough and cookie cutters were scattered. He picked up one of the cutters. It was shaped like a star. Lucy used to make cookies with Sophia. It was their Saturday morning tradition. He never joined in, always too busy with work. Richard dropped the cutter back on the counter and left the kitchen. He climbed the stairs toward Sophia's room. He could hear the girl crying from inside. He stopped in front of the door, his hand on the knob, but he couldn't bring himself to open it. What would he say? How would he explain? How could he make his own daughter understand that he was trying to protect her, even if she didn't see it that way? He heard Mrs. Evans's voice inside, firm and controlled, telling Sophia to stop the drama, that she needed to eat and behave. There was no affection in that voice. There wasn't the warmth he had heard in Marina's. Richard moved away from the door and went to his own room. He locked himself inside and went straight to the walk-in closet. In the back, in a box he rarely opened, were photos of Lucy. He picked one up where she was pregnant with Sophia, smiling at him. The camera with that smile that could light up any room. "What do I do, Lou?" he whispered to the photo. "What do I do to bring our little girl back?" The photo obviously didn't answer, but as Richard looked at that beloved face, a certainty began to form in his mind. Something was wrong. There was something happening in his own house that he wasn't seeing, and he needed to find out what it was. Later that night, after a dinner he barely touched, Richard went to his office. It was a large room on the second floor with mahogany shelves filled with books he never had time to read, an imposing executive desk, and in the corner, a security system that monitored every inch of the property. The cameras had been installed after Lucy got sick. It was a security measure, they said, to protect Sophia. Richard rarely looked at the footage. He trusted Mrs. Evans to keep everything under control, but now he turned on the system and started rewinding the recordings. He began with that afternoon, but soon realized he needed to see more. He went back days, weeks, and what he saw sent a chill down his spine. Marina did indeed play with Sophia, but it wasn't just that. She talked to the girl, read her stories, drew with her, and Sophia responded. Not with words, not at first, but with shy smiles, with nods, with a light in her eyes that Richard hadn't seen in a long time. And Mrs. Evans? The footage showed another reality. She treated Sophia with indifference when no one else was around. She spoke to the girl harshly, scolding her for the smallest missteps. In one recording, Richard saw Mrs. Evans snatch a toy from Sophia's hands with brutal force, saying that girls who didn't talk didn't deserve to play. But there was more, much more. And what Richard discovered in the following hours would change everything. In one recording from 3 days ago, he saw Mrs. Evans entering Lucy's room. The room had been sealed since she passed. Richard didn't have the courage to go in there. It was like a shrine. The housekeeper looked around, making sure she was alone, and then opened one of the dresser drawers. She took out a small box. Richard recognized it immediately. It was the jewelry box he had given Lucy on their first wedding anniversary. Inside was a diamond necklace, a one-of-a-kind piece valued at over $200,000. Mrs. Evans opened the box, took the necklace, examined it against the light, and then slipped it into her own pocket. Then, with calculated movements, she took some scarves that were in the drawer and placed them inside the box to give it volume. She closed everything and put it back in its place. Richard watched the scene 3 times to be sure of what he was seeing. Mrs. Evans had stolen the necklace, and that wasn't all. Continuing to watch the footage, he found another scene, this one from 2 days ago. Marina was in the laundry room folding clothes. Mrs. Evans came in with a bag. From the cameras, it wasn't possible to see what was inside, but the 2 women's body language told the story. Mrs. Evans was accusing Marina of something. The young woman denied it vehemently, tears streaming down her face. The housekeeper showed her something in the bag. Marina fell to her knees, still denying it. Mrs. Evans threatened her with her finger, her mouth moving in words Richard couldn't hear but which were clearly cruel. Then Mrs. Evans left the laundry room with the bag. Marina remained on the floor, crying. Richard needed to know what was in that bag. He fast-forwarded the recordings, following Mrs. Evans's movements. She went to Marina's room, entered without knocking, and hid the bag inside the young woman's closet. Then she left with a satisfied smile on her face. The trap was set. Mrs. Evans had stolen the necklace, planned to frame Marina, and thus get rid of her. The question was why? What threat did Marina represent to the housekeeper? The answer came when Richard went even further back in the recordings. He found a scene from almost a month ago. Mrs. Evans was in his office, the same one where he was now. She was on the phone. Richard turned the volume up to maximum, but even then he could barely hear. He activated the system's auto-captioning feature. The words began to appear on the screen. "You need to understand," Mrs. Evans was saying into the phone. "If this girl starts talking again, if she recovers, he won't need me anymore. I'll lose everything I've built here, this house, this job, it's all I have. I'm not going to let some little maid ruin it." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "No, she's smart. I have to be careful. But I'll find a way. I always do." Richard turned off the recording. His hands were shaking. The anger he had felt before was nothing compared to what he felt now. Mrs. Evans wasn't taking care of Sophia. She was sabotaging her recovery. And all for fear of losing her job, her status, the position of power she held in that house. He looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. The whole house was asleep. But Richard knew he wouldn't be able to sleep until he resolved this. He saved the most important recordings to a flash drive, turned off the system, and left the office. He stopped first in front of Sophia's room. He opened the door slowly. The girl was sleeping curled up, her face still stained with tears. Next to the bed on the floor was a drawing. Richard picked it up and brought it to the light of the hallway. It was a drawing of 3 people, one big, one medium, and one small, all holding hands, all smiling. Underneath, in the uncertain handwriting of a 5-year-old, was written, "Me, Marina, and Daddy." Richard felt tears burn his eyes. His daughter wanted a family. She wanted love. She wanted someone who would play with her, make her laugh, treat her like a child and not like a broken project that needed to be fixed. He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his pocket. Then he went to Mrs. Evans's room. He knocked on the door hard. Once, twice, 3 times. He heard movement inside, footsteps approaching. The door opened, and Mrs. Evans appeared, dressed in a dark robe, her hair down for the first time he'd ever seen it, her expression annoyed. "Mr. Miller, it's almost midnight." "What?" "We need to talk," Richard interrupted her. "Now." "About what?" she asked, but there was something in her voice, a hint of nervousness she was trying to hide. "About a diamond necklace, about a mysterious bag, about phone conversations, about everything you've been doing behind my back." Richard saw her face change. The mask of authority she always wore began to crack. Her eyes widened slightly. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "My office," he ordered. 5 minutes, and I suggest you think very carefully about what you're going to say." He turned and went downstairs, not waiting for a response. His footsteps echoed on the marble. For the first time in 2 years, Richard Miller felt like he was in control, and this time he wouldn't let anyone hurt his daughter again. The confrontation was about to begin, and the truth, all of it, was about to come out. Richard turned on only the desk lamp in his office, creating an interrogation-like atmosphere. He plugged the flash drive into the computer and waited, his fingers drumming lightly on the mahogany surface. Every second felt like an eternity. Through the window, he could see the lights of Greenwich twinkling in the distance, each one representing a life, a family, problems and joys he would never know. But now, for the first time in a long time, he was completely focused on his own house, on his own family. The door opened and Mrs. Evans entered. She had composed herself, her hair once again in its impeccable bun, the robe replaced by formal attire. It was as if she were preparing for battle. She closed the door carefully behind her and walked to stand before the desk, her hands clasped in front of her in that posture Richard knew so well. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice controlled but with a hint of tension she couldn't completely hide. "You startled me, knocking on my door like that. If there is something I have done to displease you, I ask that you tell me clearly so that I may correct it." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Mrs. Evans had always been good at maintaining her composure. Even now, with everything crumbling around her, she was trying to stay in control. "How many years?" he asked suddenly. She blinked, confused. "Pardon me. How many years have you worked for me, Mrs. Evans?" 12 years, sir. Since you and Mrs. Miller moved into this house." 12 years, Richard repeated, nodding slowly. 12 years of trust. 12 years in which I let you take care of my house, my family. 12 years in which I never questioned your decisions or methods. Mrs. Evans remained silent, but her eyes narrowed slightly. She knew something was coming, but she didn't know exactly what yet. "And during those 12 years," Richard continued, turning the computer monitor so she could see the screen, "did you think I would never find out?" On the screen, frozen, was the image of her entering Lucy's room with the jewelry box in her hand. The color drained from Mrs. Evans's face. Her hands, previously clasped firmly, began to tremble. "Sir, I can explain," she started, her voice failing. "Can you?" Richard pressed play. "Then explain this to me." They watched in silence as the scene unfolded on the screen. Mrs. Evans opening the drawer, taking the necklace, hiding it in her pocket. When it finished, Richard paused it again and looked back at her. $200,000, he said calmly. The necklace was worth $200,000. It wasn't just an expensive piece of jewelry, Mrs. Evans. It was a gift I gave my wife. It had sentimental value. It was the only physical thing I had left of that happy moment. "I was going to return it," she said quickly, desperately. "I only borrowed it. I needed money. My sister is sick and—" "Lies," Richard cut her off, his voice like a whip. He clicked on another file. "You didn't borrow it. You stole it. And then you tried to blame someone else." The new recording began to play. Mrs. Evans in the laundry room, accusing Marina, planting the bag in the young woman's closet. The housekeeper sank into the chair in front of the desk, her face in her hands. All her authoritarian posture had vanished, replaced by something smaller, more pathetic. "But wait," Richard said with a cold cruelty he didn't know he possessed. "There's more." He played the last recording, the phone conversation, the words appearing as captions on the screen. "You need to understand. If this girl starts talking again, if she recovers, he won't need me anymore." Mrs. Evans sobbed. It was a loud, desperate sound. She looked at Richard with pleading eyes. "Sir, please, I can explain everything. I was scared. Scared?" Richard's voice boomed, echoing off the office walls. "You were sabotaging my daughter's recovery because you were afraid of losing your job?" "It's not just the job," she yelled back, tears now streaming freely. "It's my whole life. I have nothing else, Mr. Miller. I have no family, no home of my own, no one. This mansion is all I know. After Mrs. Miller passed, I thought at least Sophia would need me. But then that girl arrived, and in a few weeks, she achieved what I couldn't in years. She made Sophia laugh. She made her talk, and I realized that if she continued, I would no longer be necessary. So you decided to destroy a 5-year-old child's happiness to protect your own comfort." Richard stood up, his hands planted on the desk. "You treated my daughter with coldness, with indifference, and you still had the audacity to come to me accusing Marina of being the villain." "I didn't know what to do." Mrs. Evans was crying openly now. "I panicked when I saw how attached Sophia became to Marina. When I saw she was becoming a normal child again, I knew my days here were numbered. So I thought if Marina left, things would go back to normal. Sophia would go back to accepting me as the only mother figure she had." "But you are not a mother figure," Richard said, each word laced with contempt. "You are an employee, and you couldn't even be that with honesty." Mrs. Evans lifted her face, tears still streaming. "What are you going to do?" "What am I going to do?" Richard laughed humorlessly. "I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to call the police, though I should. I'm not going to sue you for theft, though I have every right. You know why? Because my daughter has suffered enough. I don't want her to see more scandals, more drama, more pain. So I'm going to give you a chance you don't deserve." He opened a drawer and took out a thick envelope. Inside was cash, more money than Mrs. Evans had probably seen in months. "First thing tomorrow morning, you will pack your bags and leave this house. I'm giving you 3 months' salary as severance, more than you deserve. You will return the necklace, which I know is still hidden in your room, and you will disappear from our lives. If I ever see you again near Sophia, near this house, or near anyone in this family, I will not hesitate to take all of this footage to the authorities. Understood?" Mrs. Evans took the envelope with trembling hands. She looked at Richard, then at the money, then back at him. "I never wanted to hurt the girl," she whispered. "I just wanted her to need me." "But she doesn't need you," Richard said with a finality that left no room for argument. "She needs love, affection, someone who treats her like a child, not like a burden, and you were never capable of giving her that." Mrs. Evans stood up slowly, the envelope still in her hands. Her eyes scanned the office one last time, as if saying goodbye. "And Marina, is she staying?" "That's none of your business," Richard replied coldly. "But if you truly care about anything other than yourself, you'll hope so." The housekeeper nodded silently and headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. "Mr. Miller, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I truly am." Richard didn't answer. He simply turned his face, looking out the window. He heard the door close softly, and then he was alone again. The anger that had sustained him during the confrontation began to dissipate, leaving a deep exhaustion in its place. He looked at the clock. 1:30 in the morning. In a few hours the sun would rise, and with it would come a new day. A day without Mrs. Evans. A day where he would have to explain to Sophia what had happened. A day where he would have to talk to Marina and apologize for judging her so harshly. Richard turned off the computer and locked the flash drive in a safe he kept hidden behind one of the books on the shelf. Evidence in case he needed it in the future. Then he left the office and went upstairs toward his room. But before entering, he stopped again in front of Sophia's room. He opened the door carefully. The girl was still asleep, but her sleep seemed restless. She tossed and turned, murmuring something unintelligible. Richard went in and sat on the edge of the bed. He gently brushed a few strands of hair from her face. "Daddy's going to fix everything, Princess," he whispered. "I promise." Sophia didn't wake up, but her movements calmed slightly, as if, even in her sleep, she knew he was there. Richard stayed there for long minutes, just watching his daughter sleep. When he finally got up to leave, his eyes fell on the nightstand. There was a small drawing pad there. He picked it up and flipped through. It page after page of children's drawings. Houses, trees, flowers, people. And in almost all of them there were 3 figures. Always 3. One tall, one medium, one small. He closed the pad carefully and put it back in its place. He left the room and finally went to his own bed, but sleep wouldn't come. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened, everything he needed to do. When the sun finally began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Richard was already up. He took a long hot shower, put on casual clothes for the first time in weeks, and went down to the kitchen. It was Friday. He would cancel all his appointments for the day. For the first time in years, his priority would be his daughter, not his job. In the kitchen, he found Marina already awake, making breakfast. She turned as she heard him enter, and he saw the surprise on her face. It was clear she didn't expect to see him there, especially not dressed so casually. "Good morning, sir," she said quietly, quickly turning her attention back to the coffee maker. "Good morning, Marina," he replied, pulling out a chair and sitting at the kitchen table, something he never did. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, then turned off the stove and turned to face him. "Of course, sir." "First," he began, "I need to apologize to you. Yesterday, I judged you without knowing the full situation. I accused you unfairly and allowed my own insecurities to dictate my actions." Marina blinked, clearly surprised. "Sir, let me finish." He held up a hand. "I watched the security camera footage, all of it. I saw how you treated my daughter. I saw the patience, the affection, the dedication. I saw how you managed to reach her in a way that neither I nor any of the specialists I hired could. And I also saw what Mrs. Evans did, how she framed you, how she lied, how she manipulated the situation." Tears began to form in Marina's eyes. She said nothing, just waited. "Mrs. Evans no longer works here," Richard continued. "She left this morning and she won't be back. and I would very much like for you to stay, not just as a kitchen employee, but as someone who can truly help Sophia." Marina quickly wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Mr. Miller, I never wanted to cause any trouble. When I first saw Sophia, so sad, so withdrawn, my heart just broke. I have a younger sister. She's the same age as Sophia, and I couldn't imagine my little sister in that state. So I just tried to do what I would do with her. Play, talk, make cookies, simple things." "And it worked," Richard said with a sad smile. "In 3 weeks, you accomplished what I couldn't in 2 years." "That's not true, sir," Marina said quickly. "Sophia always wanted to come back. She was always there. She just needed someone who wouldn't pressure her, who wouldn't try to fix her as if she were broken. She just needed time and someone to love her for who she is." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. She was right. He had treated Sophia like a project, something that needed to be fixed. He hired specialists, bought books, followed programs. But he never just sat on the floor and played with her, never picked her up for no reason, never sang silly songs or played airplane with her on his shoulders. "You're right," he admitted, "and I've been a terrible father." "No, sir." Marina took a step forward. "You haven't been terrible. You were grieving too. Losing someone you love is hard, and having to be strong for a small child on top of that, that's nearly impossible. You did the best you could with the tools you had." "But it wasn't enough," Richard said quietly. "So we'll do things differently from now on," Marina smiled softly. "Together." "Together," Richard repeated, liking the sound of the word. They were interrupted by a noise from the stairs. Small, quick footsteps. Sophia appeared at the kitchen entrance, still in her pajamas, her hair messy, her eyes searching. When she saw Marina, her whole face lit up. "Marina!" She ran to the young woman, who immediately scooped her up. "Good morning, Princess," Marina said, kissing the top of the girl's head. Sophia snuggled into her neck, then looked at her father with some hesitation. "Daddy," she said softly. "Good morning, Sophia," Richard replied, trying to keep his voice calm, despite the emotion flooding him at hearing his daughter speak directly to him. The girl looked around. "Where's Mrs. Evans?" Richard and Marina exchanged a look. "Mrs. Evans had to go on a trip, sweetie," Richard said gently, improvising. "She's not coming back." Sophia seemed to think about this for a moment. "She was mean to me," the girl said suddenly, with a disarming simplicity. Richard felt his heart clench. "She was?" Sophia nodded. "She gave me cold food. She said girls who don't talk don't deserve hot food. And she locked me in my room when I cried. She said I was an annoying baby." Every word was a knife. Richard had to make a conscious effort not to show the rage he felt. Marina hugged Sophia tighter, her own eyes welling up. "That will never happen again," Richard promised, standing up and moving closer to them. "Never again, Princess. Daddy promises." Sophia looked at him, studying his face as if trying to decide if she could trust that promise. Then, slowly, she reached a small hand out to him. Richard took it, lacing his fingers with hers. "Daddy's staying home today," he said. "We're going to do something fun. What do you want to do?" Sophia looked at Marina, then back at her father. "Cookies?" she asked shyly. "Cookies," Richard repeated, smiling. "Of course, we'll make cookies together." And so the day began. Richard, Marina, and Sophia in the kitchen making cookies. Marina taught, Sophia helped, and Richard tried to keep up, clumsy but determined. There was flour everywhere, dough on their clothes, and lots of laughter. Especially laughter. The days that followed were different. Richard rearranged his schedule, delegated more responsibilities at work, and started coming home earlier. Dinners that were once solitary now happened at the table, the three of them together. Sophia gradually began to talk more, still shy with her father, but increasingly open. Marina became an essential part of the routine. She wasn't just the kitchen staff. She was the one who took Sophia to the park, who read bedtime stories, who invented games and adventures. And Richard slowly learned to relax, to let go of the serious executive, and discover the father he always wanted to be but never knew how. However, it wasn't all perfect. There were difficult moments, nights when Sophia woke up crying, calling for her mother, days when the girl would become quiet again, lost in her own thoughts. And in those moments it was Marina who knew exactly what to do. A song, a hug, a story. Small gestures that made all the difference. Richard watched from a distance, admiring and grateful, but also increasingly aware of something that bothered him. Sophia had become very attached to Marina. Very. The girl followed the young woman all over the house, panicked when Marina had to leave to run an errand, and would only sleep when Marina put her to bed. It was as if she had transferred all the dependence she had on her mother to this young woman, and that scared Richard. Not out of jealousy, not anymore, but out of fear. What would happen if one day Marina decided to leave? If she found another job, met someone, or simply wanted to live her own life? Would Sophia recover from that loss? Or would she retreat back into the mutism that had imprisoned her for so long? He tried to talk to Marina about it one night after Sophia was asleep. They were in the living room, drinking tea. Marina had become more than an employee. She had become a confidant, someone he could speak with openly. "Do you realize how much Sophia depends on you?" he asked, carefully. Marina nodded, looking at the cup in her hands. "Yes, sir, I do." "And that doesn't worry you?" She looked up to meet his eyes. "It does, but at the same time I think it's natural. Sophia lost her mother very young. She's looking for a female figure to trust. Over time, that dependence will lessen. She'll open up more to you too, she'll make friends. She'll connect with other people." "And what if you leave?" Richard asked, verbalizing the fear that tormented him. Marina was silent for a long moment. "I don't plan on going anywhere, sir, at least not for now. Sophia needs me, and honestly, I need her too." Richard noticed something in her voice, a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "Why do you need her?" Marina hesitated, then sighed. "I lost someone too, sir. My mother. It was 2 years ago, around the same time Mrs. Miller passed away. Cancer, too. My family fell apart after that. My dad started drinking, my siblings scattered. I came to New York looking for a fresh start. When I got this job and met Sophia, it was like I found a purpose again. Taking care of her helps, and me deal with my own pain." Richard didn't know what to say. He had assumed so many things about Marina, had judged her so quickly, and in the end, she was just a person trying to survive her own losses, just like him. "I'm so sorry," he said finally. "I didn't know." "There was no way for you to know, sir. I don't talk about it much." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. "Marina," Richard said suddenly. "Yes, sir?" "Stop calling me sir, at least when we're alone. My name is Richard." She smiled. "Okay, Richard." And just like that, in that simple moment, something shifted between them. An invisible barrier fell. They were no longer just boss and employee. They were two people who had lost loved ones, two people trying to help a little girl find joy again, two people learning that shared pain can become a little lighter. The days turned into weeks. The routine settled in. Richard worked in the mornings, came home for lunch, and spent the afternoons with Sophia and Marina. Weekends were sacred, dedicated entirely to family. They visited parks, children's museums, the mall, for ice cream. Sophia blossomed. Her cheeks gained color, her eyes regained their sparkle, her laughter became more and more frequent. But then everything changed again, and this time it was much worse. It was on a Tuesday that everything started to fall apart. Richard was in an important meeting at the company's headquarters on Park Avenue. The meeting dragged on for hours, discussions of mergers and acquisitions that demanded his full attention. He had promised Sophia he would be home in time for dinner, but the negotiations got complicated. When he finally managed to leave, it was already past 8 at night. The traffic was chaotic as always, and Richard drummed his fingers impatiently on the armrest while Mr. Peterson navigated the sea of gridlocked cars. He picked up his phone and called home. Marina answered on the second ring. "Hi, Richard," she said, and he noticed something strange in her voice, an underlying tension. "Is everything okay?" he asked immediately. There was a pause. "Yes, it is," Sophia's fine. Just a little upset you didn't make it for dinner. I know, I'm stuck in traffic. I'll be there in half an hour tops. Did she eat? She did, but not much. She's waiting for you to read her a bedtime story. Richard sighed in relief. Tell her Daddy's on his way, and we'll read 2 stories tonight to make up for it. He heard Marina laugh softly. Okay, drive safe. The call ended, but Richard was left with an uneasy feeling. There was something in Marina's voice that bothered him, something she wasn't saying. He tried calling back, but this time no one answered. She was probably busy with Sophia, he thought, putting his phone away. When he finally got home, it was almost 9 o'clock. The mansion was strangely quiet. The lights upstairs were on, but there were none of the usual sounds. No music playing, no childish laughter, no movement. "Marina," he called out, dropping his briefcase in the foyer. No answer. "Sophia?" Silence. A chill ran down his spine. Richard took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart racing. When he reached the second-floor hallway, he saw that the door to Sophia's room was ajar. He pushed it all the way open and stepped inside. What he found made him stop in his tracks. Marina was sitting on the floor next to the bed, holding Sophia in her lap. The girl was curled up against her chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. Marina had tears streaming down her own face, and when she looked up at Richard, he saw something that terrified him. Fear. What happened? He rushed over to them, kneeling beside them. Marina opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. She just hugged Sophia tighter. The girl turned slightly, looked at her father, and then hid her face again in Marina's shoulder. "Sophia, princess, what is it?" Richard tried to touch his daughter, but she flinched. Away. It was then that he noticed. On the floor, scattered around them, were torn pieces of paper. Richard picked up one of the fragments. It was part of a photograph. He recognized it immediately. It was a picture of Lucy. His heart sank. "What happened to the pictures?" Marina finally managed to speak, her voice hoarse and trembling. "She was looking for you. She wanted to show you a drawing she made. She went into your room. The closet door was open. She saw the box." The box. Richard knew exactly which box. The one where he kept Lucy's. Photos, her mementos, her personal things. The box he never showed Sophia, because he thought protecting her from the memories would be better than letting her face them. "She opened it?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Marina nodded. She saw everything, the photos, the letters, the objects. And then she started crying. I tried to calm her down. I tried to explain, but she became completely hysterical. She started tearing up the photos, screaming that it was her fault, that Mommy left because of her. "No," Richard whispered, feeling the world crumble around him. "No, no, no." He tried to hold Sophia, but the girl struggled violently. "Don't touch me," she screamed. "You hate me. You keep Mommy away from me because you hate me." The words were like bullets. Richard recoiled, stunned. "Sophia, I would never—" "You hid her," the girl continued between sobs. "You locked Mommy in that box and never let me see. It's because I killed her. I killed Mommy." "No," Richard practically shouted. "You didn't kill anyone, Sophia. Mommy got sick. It wasn't your fault. It was never your fault." But Sophia wasn't listening. She buried her face in Marina's shoulder again, crying so hard her whole little body trembled. Marina looked at Richard, her eyes pleading for help, but he didn't know what to do. All his business acumen, all his intelligence, all his money, none of it mattered now. He didn't know how to reach his own daughter. Marina, with infinite gentleness, began to rock Sophia, humming a lullaby softly. Gradually the girl's sobs subsided, not because she was better, but because she was exhausted. Her little eyes closed against her will, until she finally fell asleep, still clinging to Marina. With extreme care, Marina stood up and placed Sophia in bed, pulling the blanket over her. She kissed her forehead gently and then turned to Richard, who was still kneeling on the floor, surrounded by pieces of torn memories. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Downstairs." Richard nodded mutely. He gathered the photo fragments with trembling hands and stuffed them into his pockets. Then he followed Marina out of the room, closing the door silently behind him. In the living room, Marina sat down heavily on the sofa, running her hands over her face. Richard remained standing, unable to be still, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "How did this happen?" he finally asked. "How did they let her into my room?" Marina looked up, and there was something in her eyes Richard couldn't identify. "She didn't get into your room, Richard. You left the closet door open. The box was visible from the hallway. Sophia walked by, saw it, and went in." "But I always lock it," he protested. "This morning you were in a hurry. The meeting was moved up, remember? You grabbed that file from the closet and rushed out. You left everything open." The truth hit him like a ton of bricks. It was his fault. In his rush to leave, in his obsession with work, he had left exposed the very thing he had tried so hard to protect Sophia from. "I've ruined everything," he said, stopping his pacing and slumping into an armchair. "Everything was getting better, she was happy, and I ruined it." "You didn't ruin anything," Marina said firmly. "This was going to happen one way or another. Sophia needs to process her mother's death. You can't pretend Lucy never existed." "I wasn't pretending," Richard protested. "I was just trying to protect her." "Protect her from what? From memories? From feelings? Richard, you can't shield a 5-year-old from emotions. They'll exist anyway, only they'll be repressed, distorted, and turned into something much worse." Richard ran his hands through his hair, frustration and despair warring within him. "So what do I do? What do we do? She thinks she killed her own mother, Marina. How do I deal with that?" Marina stood up and went to him, kneeling in front of the armchair to meet his eyes. "You talk to her. For real. No filters, no trying to soften it. You tell her about Lucy, about the illness, about everything. Kids understand so much more than we think. What they don't understand is silence, secrets, hidden things. What if it makes things worse? What if she can't handle it?" "She will," Marina said, taking his hands. "With you by her side, with love and patience, she will. But you need to be truly present. Not just physically, but emotionally. You need to open up too." Richard looked into those brown eyes that had become so familiar over the past few weeks. Eyes that saw through his defenses, that challenged him to be better, to be more. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I'm scared to talk about Lucy because when I do, it makes it all real again. The pain comes back. And I don't know if I can go through that again." "Then don't go through it alone." Marina squeezed his hands. "We'll do it together. You, me, and Sophia. A family." The word family echoed in the air between them. Richard realized that's exactly what they had become. Not on paper, not officially, but in their hearts. They were a family. A broken, patched-up, improvised family, but a family nonetheless. "Marina," he said softly. "Yes? Thank you. For everything. For being here. For not giving up on us." She smiled, and in that smile was so much warmth, so much understanding, so much affection, that Richard felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a very long time, something that scared him and comforted him at the same time. Before he could overanalyze the feeling, a scream cut through the air. Sophia. They raced upstairs. They burst into the room to find Sophia sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with terror, screaming for Marina. The young woman ran to her, gathering her into her arms. "It's okay, I'm here," Marina murmured, rocking the girl. But Sophia wouldn't calm down. The screams turned into hysterical crying. "I saw her," the girl said between sobs. "I saw Mommy, she was calling me, she wanted me to go with her." "It was just a dream, Princess," Marina tried to soothe her. "Mommy isn't calling you." "Yes, she is," Sophia insisted, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. "She's right there, she's calling me." Richard felt a shiver run down his spine. Was Sophia hallucinating? This was serious, very serious. He grabbed his phone, ready to call the doctor, but Marina stopped him with a look. "Sophia," she said gently but firmly, "look at me, just at me." The girl reluctantly tore her gaze from the empty corner of the room and focused on Marina. "Mommy isn't calling you," Marina continued, "because Mommy loves you very much, And she wants you to stay here, with the people who love you, with Daddy, with me. Mommy doesn't want you to go, she wants you to be happy." "But I killed her," Sophia whimpered. "I was bad and she went away." It was then that Richard moved. He sat on the bed next to Marina, forcing Sophia to look at him too. "Sophia," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he expected. "Listen to Daddy now. You did not kill Mommy. Mommy got very sick. There was a bad thing inside her that the doctors couldn't take out. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes people get sick and the doctors can't make them better. And that's very sad, but it's nobody's fault. But if I was a better girl," Sophia said, tears streaming, "maybe Mommy would have fought harder. Maybe she would have stayed." Richard felt his own tears burn his eyes. "Oh, Princess. Mommy fought with all her might. She fought so hard, because she loved you more than anything in the world. But sometimes, no matter how hard we fight, we can't win. And it's not because we don't love enough. It's because some battles are just bigger than we are." "So it wasn't my fault?" Sophia asked, a fragile hope in her voice. "It wasn't your fault," Richard repeated, this time taking his daughter into his own lap, lifting her from Marina's arms. Sophia was stiff for a moment, but then she allowed herself to relax against his chest. "It never was, and it never will be your fault. And Mommy loves you. She will always love you, no matter where she is." "Does Daddy love me?" Sophia asked softly, so softly he almost didn't hear. "More than anything in the world," he answered, holding her tight. "More than anything in the world, Princess." They stayed like that for long minutes, Richard holding Sophia, Marina sitting. Beside them, her hand resting gently on the girl's back. Slowly, Sophia began to calm down again. Her breathing became more regular, her body relaxed. "Daddy?" she said after a while. "Yes, Princess." "Can you tell me about Mommy? What was she like when you met her? How did you become friends?" Richard looked at Marina, who nodded encouragingly. He took a deep breath and began. "I met your mother at a party. It was a friend's birthday. I was bored, ready to leave, when she walked into the room. And it was like the sun had just risen inside. The house." Sophia snuggled closer, listening intently. And then I went to talk to her. But I was very clumsy. I tripped over my own feet and spilled juice on her shirt." Sophia let out a small giggle. "You did that?" "I did." Richard smiled at the memory, and instead of getting mad, she laughed, that laugh of hers that lit up everything, and she said at least now she had an excuse to leave that boring party. "She thought the party was boring too?" Sophia asked. "She did. So we left together. We went to get ice cream at the shop on the corner, and we talked all night about everything, about dreams, about fears, about what we wanted from life." "And what did Mommy want?" Richard felt his throat tighten. "She wanted to be happy. She wanted to have a family. She wanted to have a beautiful little girl that she could love and take care of. And then you were born, and she said she had everything she had ever dreamed of." "I want to remember her too," Sophia said. "Can I see the pictures? The ones I didn't tear up?" "Of course you can," Richard promised. "Tomorrow we'll sit down together and look at all the pictures, and I'll tell you stories about every single one." "And can Marina stay too?" Sophia asked, looking at the young woman. Marina smiled. "Of course I'll stay." Sophia seemed satisfied with that answer. She settled more comfortably in her father's arms and closed her eyes. This time, when sleep came, it was peaceful. Richard continued to hold her long after she had fallen asleep. Marina stood up silently to leave the room, but he caught her hand. "Stay," he pleaded, "please." She hesitated, then nodded. She sat, back down on the bed, this time closer to him. They stayed like that in silence, just existing in the moment. Richard holding Sophia, Marina by his side, the three of them together in the midst of the storm. It was Marina who finally broke the silence. "What are you feeling?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "Scared, relieved, guilty. All at the same time. Guilty for what? For not doing this sooner. For hiding Lucy from her. for thinking silence was protection. You did what you thought was best at the time. You can't punish yourself for that. But I should have known better, he insisted. I'm her father. I should have realized I was doing it all wrong. Marina turned to face him directly. Richard, you want to know what I think? I think you're the most dedicated father I've ever seen. Did you make mistakes? Yes. But when you realized it, you changed. You opened up. You're here now, holding your daughter, being the father she needs. That's what matters. He smiled sadly. When did you get so wise? When I lost my mom and had to learn that life is too short for regrets. Every day is a new chance to do better, and you are doing better. Richard looked at Sophia sleeping in his arms. The girl seemed so small, so fragile, but he knew she was stronger than she looked. She had to be. She had survived losing her mother, the mutism, Mrs. Evans, everything. And she was coming back, slowly, with ups and downs, but she was coming back. What about you? He asked suddenly. How are you handling all this? Marina blinked in surprise. Me? Yeah, this can't be easy for you either. Taking care of a traumatized child, dealing with a boss who didn't know what he was doing, witnessing all this chaos. She was silent for a moment. Honestly, it saved me. Saved you? She nodded. After my mum passed, I was lost. I didn't know who I was without her. I came to New York to run away, really. Running from the memories, the pain, everything. And then I got this job and met Sophia. And for the first time since I lost my mum, I felt like I had a purpose again. Taking care of her helped me heal my own wounds. Richard studied her face. In the dim light of the room, illuminated only by Sophia's nightlight, Marina looked almost ethereal. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience he deeply admired. And there was something else, something he couldn't name, but that made his heart beat faster whenever she was near. Marina, he began, not sure what he was going to say. But she placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. Not now. Right now, you need to focus on Sophia, on helping her heal. The rest can wait. She was right, as always. Richard nodded, and Marina stood to leave. This time he didn't. Stop her. She paused at the door, looked back one last time, smiled softly, and then she was gone. Richard was alone with Sophia. He carefully placed her back in bed, covered her with the blanket, and sat in the chair beside her. He wasn't going to leave her alone tonight. If she woke up with nightmares again, he would be there. And as he watched his daughter sleep, Richard made a silent promise. He would be better, not just as a father, but as a person. He would face his own pain, his own fears, his own demons. For Sophia, for himself, and though he wouldn't admit it yet, for Marina too. Because she was right, they were a family. A strange, unconventional family, but a family. And families protect each other. Families weather the storms together. And families, no matter how broken, can always heal, if they have enough love. And love was the one thing they weren't short on.